Well, how are you today? I'm sitting here with Sean Parker. And so you actually had just finished writing a book, right?
Yeah, that's correct, Johnny. Yes, I've just got a new one coming out in about a month, but also I've got an audio book from the last one, which is done from last year. So I keep up the churn.
Perfect. Yeah. And what was the main subject of the newest book that you have coming out?
The one I've got coming out in about a month is A Delicate Balance of Reason, it's called, and it's Adventures in the Culture Wars as a subtitle. So just to give people an idea about what's going on inside it, I'm a cultural theorist a lot of the time, so I keep my eye on what's going on, as we'll talk about.
And does it chart a big change over time? Or are you specifically focusing on one certain point of time or one major phenomenon, or are you kind of charting like a growth over time or changes to the culture and how much it has been influenced by certain events?
Kind of quite a lot of kind of academics, especially from America. Mr. Greg Lukianoff, for example, has been talking about over the last 10 years, from specifically 2014. People keep coming up with that year, and here we are, 2024. So over the last 10 years, there have been massive changes. Everybody knows what's happened. No one really talks about the dates and the timelines very much, and as to why. So I've tried to frame the structure around that time, where lots of us have had our own sort of last sort of 10 years, and people think about these things in terms of the events of their own lives. So I've tried to fit all that into there in the timeline sort of sense that you mentioned.
So it like opens the door for a lot of people to kind of get a better access to it. I've noticed a lot of people seem to base assumptions with modern media very, very quickly. So they'll see just a couple of little flashes of something that could be, either true or untrue, and then suddenly they have a much faster picture forming in their mind of like what a certain country is like, or what a culture is like, or what a religion is like, and it happens so much quicker than it would, I would assume, before the advent of all these devices where things were so quick. You would have to actually read things and talk to people and, maybe study it in a library and maybe a bit of a slower setting. But now you have people who could just instantly ask Siri or Google something. And do you think that has had a huge effect on culture, or do you think that it's more of a situation where culture is influencing the media more?
I think that if you ask anybody over 35, they're going to say it's had a terrible effect on culture, and under 35, they'll say it's the culture. So for people like me, it's trying to understand it, keep up with it, of course, and because lots of other people will understand it better than I how to use it. But being having come sort of out of the last century and into this one and keeping my eye on it means that yes, it's had a terrible effect on how people interact because, as you mentioned, there's no reflection on judgment. There's just judgment, as opposed to going, well, so the only thing I can do on X, where I attempt to nurture a nice sort of following because it's free speech and it's lively and, Musk, is to try at all times to keep as much of a balance as possible and to show people that's the way to be nice. It's a nice way to be, but certain subjects like whether it be Depp Heard or Israel Gaza, of course, that one's a international, intense, and sort of grim, proper politics situation where that's the culture wars becoming war. And the other one with the Depp Heard is very much it's a relatable thing where everyone goes, ah, well, that's what domestic violence is really about. So those fascinating culturally, but the way we discuss it and the way the Depp Heard fans go at each other, it blows my mind sometimes.
It's absolutely correct. It's the toxicity levels are very high, but also I'm seeing the same problem in those cases. Those are excellent examples because people will take the smallest headline and then that will be their entire perception of an entire war or a case, and like things like that kind of they do worry me because I do see the less literacy, like media literacy there is, where people are unable to discern, is this source real, is it fake, is it honest, is like because they want information as fast as possible, and the quicker the information is, I think it risk sacrificing accuracy and data
Mm,
because they people just want it fast. They don't want it necessarily to be accurate. But those examples are excellent because you will see people just form an entire opinion on, the nature of domestic violence, how America and Britain handles, domestic violence cases, or what is abuse, what is subtle abuse, what is psychological, physical abuse. Like they'll form all these huge, deep opinions on things that they haven't seen the evidence for. They've only seen maybe a headline, or they heard a slanted podcast, or something like that. So they don't get both sides of what's going on, or they have a limited historical understanding. For example, most people that I talk to about Gaza, they tend to talk about the 40s, but this has been going on so much longer before the 1940s. So
mhm,
that's part of my worry, and it's also why I do enjoy your posts, because they are very they tend to be more balanced and fair. I'm highly opinionated, so but
mhm.
it's great to see someone like you actually trying to bridge divides and see, why people are kind of interpreting these things the way that they do, especially in these large groups of minorities. Like, and I don't even mean like the makeup. I mean like minority in the sense that just holding that opinion. Like you're
Mm,
definitely in the minority if you believe, for example, Amber Heard, or if there's a group of people that believes that Harvey Weinstein did like absolutely nothing wrong to anyone, like that's a tiny minority, but those people do exist on the internet. So it's like things
mm.
like that. So, um, what is your opinion about how these cultural problems that we're seeing today, like the main biggest ones that are always debated, like cancel culture and things like that? How do you think that ties into some of these specific people, like J.K. Rowling, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. With JK is in the age bracket that I mentioned before, which being 55, I believe, and she's a Brit, of course, a Scottish Brit, and it's very interesting to see her go against her children, which is the Harry Potter actors, in the last couple of weeks, where a month ago we had the W Path files being exposed, and just over the last week, um, we've had the puberty blockers be outlawed in the private sector as well as the NHS in Britain. So the science has come out and said that this is being done um, in, irresponsibly, to say the least. And JK for 5 years has been saying what a woman is, and never been transphobic. There's nothing you can find in her tweets that's transphobic. That's a new invention, that term anyway. Never mind the language, it's another subject of mine. But there's nothing in any of her communications that's like that. She doesn't have a go at trans people. She has a go at the activists who are trying to redefine the nature of biology. And on that level, I agree with her, because I believe in the integrity of biology. We can think ourselves into whatever situation we want, but you cannot redefine what it is to be a human unless you want to live in a fantasy world, and that's fine. But you can't tell everybody else they have to indulge that, and that's the main problem for me as a man. And then for women, there's a whole other. It's not cis women. That's not a thing that exists. For women, there's a whole other issue where you're basically uh, redefining what they are without asking them. So that's kind of my position on trans, rather than her herself attempted to answer you.
Yeah, no, I've never seen her say a single thing specifically targeting or against someone because of what they want to do personally, in or with their body, with surgery or anything, or what they want to wear. I've only ever seen her call out specific cases where men actually were arrested, and then they decided to transition into a woman, and they were put into a women's prison and things like that. Like she's worried about spaces specific to women that were made to protect them are being taken over, basically, or men are basically infiltrating the ranks of those places. And um, a lot of her hatred has come from, I think, a redefinition of the word as well. Because to say someone's transphobic is to say that they are afraid, phobic of transgender people. She's never expressed any fear because she hasn't stopped talking. So if she was afraid, she would have shut up by now. So she's not
Mm.
phobic, and I don't think she has a problem with trans people because, like, as much as people like to say, "Oh, this means nothing," she does have like very dedicated genuine transgender friends and she loves them. So like somebody who actually hated someone because they're trans would not have trans friends. And it's like it is a tired argument, but still it does make some actual sense because she has listed long conversations she's had with these people as well. Like these are their perspective on it. They agree with me. It's like, so you can't just put every single person into a box just because they do something that you think should be normalized or that you do personally, because then what happens is you're telling other people just because you're boiling them down to that thing, just because you are, X factor, therefore you have to agree with me because I'm part of this group and all of our X factors say we have to be this. So I think she's also become kind of a victim of just redefinitions and different groups of the same subset just infighting, because you have a lot of transgender people who don't think that kids should be, put onto puberty blockers or have their gender reassigned by their teachers. It should be like a family thing, and not extend to kids under 18 at all. So the problem is, I just don't think that web can be untangled in some countries like America where there's so much money now in that it would be very, very hard to do a ban on puberty blockers. So, I mean, honestly, where I am, it's actually probably going to be a lot harder to get to the point where you guys have reached.
Mm. That's interesting, isn't it? Like, yeah, I'm we often get the impression here that we follow America and we do in lots of things and for to good and bad consequences. And in this one, it's almost like our size has kind of come down to sort of saying, because there's a lot of people on a small island, and so it's like we have to make decisions quite quickly and to say, is this right or is this wrong? What are we going to do about this? And there's been some kind of a thing where America's so huge and diverse, literally diverse. Every we all know that, and we love it for that.
Yeah.
Is that it's very hard to get anything done in this one direction of saying um, what we're noticing. What's underneath all this is the gender studies courses of the 80s and 90s coming to maturity, and people being encouraged into journalism, into the civil service, into politics with agendas and teaching to basically redefine society without a mandate. And they've been told how to do that is to press the levers of power. And they're pressing the levers of power everywhere. And so, whether you're a man or a woman, you can recognize this. Okay, and you immediately get called far right, alt right, whatever else they want to. I come from the left in the old days. Now I'm totally center, as you notice from the posts,
Yeah.
because it's the other ones are not thinking. And the only way to think about it is to go, what's actually going on? And under JK's argument for women and under mine for rationality is I don't want people unelected coming in to, other people say to make a communist state, whatever. It's just to redefine the nature of things without permission because we haven't given our democratic vote for that. So that's why it's anti democratic. And the proper left don't really care about that too much.
Yeah. I mean, we also have in the halls of government, you have people declaring, this days of visibility and entire months for this thing, right? But they never have any like actual scientific evidence to back it up. Like, because of all these, I've never seen a study that said because of all these transitions, these lives have been improved. I've only ever seen, and obviously it's anecdotal, but still the evidence should be out there if it would exist. I've only ever seen detransition stories and problems with the suicide rate. I've seen trauma as one of the main reasons why people want to go do that in the first place. There's some sort of other trauma. So instead of being treated for a different type of issue they may have had, whether it be genetic or whether it be mental or any disability, they are actually being told to do something else that's just completely unrelated. Like, oh, well, maybe you're actually a woman, rather than maybe you have maybe we have a schizophrenic on our hands and we need to help this person. But like, there seems to be a genuine lack of actual care, and the Hippocratic Oath is kind of being swept under the rug in a lot of cases because these are expensive surgeries, and it seems like they're making a lot of people money to be promoting this and be selling the flag and be selling items and merch and be selling characters in media and then just be selling kids on surgeries. Just like there's a lot of money, and I think it's going to be very hard to undo that. But also culturally, the media is what another thing I wanted to ask you about. In the UK, Is your media system similar to ours, where probably 75% of it is owned by either the state or super large companies, and they all kind of say the same thing, kind of parrot the same opinions?
Corrupt, corrupt, corrupt. As I don't think is that different, with the states. Um, that we have about the 10 different titles. Half of them are owned by Rupert Murdoch, of course, which and he's got a foot in both of our countries, and that's been the case for 50 years. So there's his thing, which is it's a centre right sort of position of doing things, but the papers don't always reflect that. They actually do have their own editorial slant. So the problem is, if you go to the Guardian, which is massive, then you know you're going to get the right on progressive situation of pretty much on the trans side, for example, where it's like let people be what they want to be and destroy the state at the same time. That's what we want. And but sometimes they've started to listen to a degree of complaint or whatever, or they've just tried to broaden out, and they have arguments from the other side, and so they introduce that, which is really quite offsetting because you're like, oh well, okay, I'm not going to hate the Guardian so much anymore. The same with the Daily Mail, which is meant to be a right wing rag for years. It's now it's the biggest site in the world for media, as I believe, or print media, whatever, and it's the most read, and because of that it's got millions of constant churning stories, and all sorts of different things from the left to the right in there. So you're like, right, you can't really apply that to the Mail anymore in good faith, but everyone says the Mail are a bunch of Tories and the Guardian are a bunch of lefties. It's actually not the case anymore, and the Telegraph, which is pretty much the oldest here, is historically called the Tory graph, is now become the most respected broadsheet, where it does very interesting centre ground takes on lots of things, and it almost looks like they don't support the Conservatives anymore. So it's a mixed thing always. They change tack without telling anybody they're going to change tack, so you don't know where you are anymore. And we got the channel called I don't know if you've heard about it, but the GB News here.
I
Um,
have.
yeah, which has been going for now 2.5 years or something, since 2020, since COVID, and it was pretty much started as a response to Brexit situation here, and people have said it's a mimic of Fox News. I wouldn't go that far. It's not quite so shouty, and it's more British because it's called GB News. But you can see what they mean with a certain person-centered presentation, anti-woke as anything, which makes it very watchable. Even if you're sort of on the progressive side, you're going to enjoy watching it because it's just very lively, and they're cashing in on that. They're getting very big, and that's been a big sort of changer into the media system that we got going on here.
Where do you place Piers Morgan on that scale? Is he on the crazy
Oh,
side, or is he kind of hovering in between crazy and rage baiter?
right. Well, yeah, he's on Talk TV, which started at the same time as GB News a few years ago. Um, he's the biggest journalist in Britain and possibly over there. I don't know. He's huge, isn't he? And he's got a lot of he keeps great camps in the anti-woke, as in he's very good on the men's rights sort of subjects, which I wouldn't call myself a men's rights activist, but I'm very into equal rights, which are in a difficult state for men at the moment. I'll go that far with it, and he's brilliant on that. So you kind of watch him for that and go on, Piers, give it to BBC. Um, but he's shouty. He can't help be shouty, and that's part of his USP. So we kind of go, that's Piers. But so much of what he says is actually very reasonable, just expressed with this exasperation that the journalists do. And it's a way that I don't try to do any media that I do, and I'm just on a tiny scale compared to it. But it's important to lead by sanity. And I can never go to that kind of gotcha journalism that these guys do. That kind of they won't appreciate being called gotcha, but tr- trying to make a fuss over anything because it's just another day. I attempt to keep it for the right stories.
Yeah, anyone with limited airtime is going to need the biggest possible reaction out of each interview. Otherwise, it's going to be, not as many people watching or not as interested, clicking off, things like that. So I'm like, I understand his personal predicament in there. He's kind of working to keep some people happy and keep money flowing in. But he does
Mm.
have a fairly good I think, ability to make sure someone stays on track with what the discussion is, or try and force people to answer a question. He'll ask it 12 times in a row. If they don't, answer it the fifth time, he'll keep trying. But the only times I've ever been super annoyed with him were when he just kind of makes a snap judgment and does a quick tweet and is, just completely off. But um, sometimes it happens to everyone. But as kind of a bulwark, though, kind of standing up against just the same old parroting, I have enjoyed some of his work on that. And he's not afraid to interview people without worrying about how it's going to reflect on him, because like talking to Andrew Tate should not be what gets you canceled. Like if Andrew Tate does something horrible or if he actually trafficked people, he should be arrested. But like journalists have no obligation to not invite or not give a platform to people. And I've seen that said so many times, like, why are you giving X person a platform? And it's like, because there's no reason we shouldn't, because if they're horrible we should see it, and if they're not, then they should be allowed to speak anyway. Like either way, you should be allowed to say what's on your mind, rather than be pigeonholed away because some people might not like you. It's like that's not a good enough reason not to have someone on a show. The only reason I could think to have someone not on a show is if they are in solitary confinement or they actually are just a nobody, or they did nothing, or they did something horrible. But so many people always calling for people not to have their say. Um, and that did occur a lot with JK, but she's not backing down, despite Scotland's new law. So, I mean, there at some point they're going to have to give up, right? Or do you think these activists are just, endlessly preserved by something? Like, what drives them to never give up every single day and keep trying to tear anyone down that they think is even the slightest bit of a threat?
I'd say that this thing, the culture wars in general, have become deeply embedded in people's identity. So if they've got an anti-JK thing going on, if they're Billy Bragg, who's a songwriter that I used to love in the 80s, he's a he was great, and but now over the last sort of few years, he can't help himself but do the tweeting that you allude to earlier, which is just people talking bollocks. And it's like he might have his beliefs in this whole thing, but to endlessly come at people, I mean, the people who speak the things that I agree with also go too far, and they do it in a ridiculous way. Jordan Peterson probably being the brilliant example of this, a fine brain and a respected psychologist who just shit tweets all the time,
Yeah.
but he's still fantastic in his what he does, So it's and he admits that. So I'm not putting, not doing him down. These people get passionate and emotional, so we recognise that. I mean, some people like it. Um, and I can see why they like it, and it gets embedded into people's character, and that takes away from the objectivity. Objectivity is very important to me. I'm not a scientist by any stretch, but I'm a agnostic. I don't mind sharing that with you, and I look at things as they are, not what people have said about them. Because I know what the media is, as you've alluded to. It's a business and a monster. It's amoral, which is partly why I like it. It just does whatever's practical for it to do, like peers. So when you recognize that, you can respond, but everyone responds to it emotionally. So if you see a story on Depp and Heard, which is a uh, middle-aged, highly respected, handsome actor, loved over decades, with a beautiful younger woman, partner of his, and after a couple of years, they started to tear strips out of each other, and it appears to be more her than him, but then there's other footage and it's all very, and they will all tear me a new one for even saying either of those things. But there's no reason why I wouldn't, because it's such a relatable story, this man and this woman, and that's what it comes down to. But fans don't really do that, they just do evil and um, perfect, and that's just not the case of humanity, is it?
Yeah, I feel the same way about a lot of those things, is where I just want the truth of the matter, regardless of where it's going to lead or what it's going to make me feel, or what kind of preconceived notions I'm going to have to change in my mind in order to keep moving forward without the cognitive dissonance, right? So, I mean, that's another gripe I have with Peterson, is that like he's very knowledgeable about psychology, right? That's his field. That's what he studied. He's a clinical psychologist. Then he goes out and he tries to be an expert on, right wing ish American political assumptions and beliefs and things like that. And he tries to do religious tours while simultaneously never really saying officially whether he even believes in any particular interpretation or not, because every time he does a talk or an interview or a debate about that, it's always, well, what is the psychological benefits for a populace to probably believe in some sort of myth or something? He never actually says, I truly believe in this, and therefore I'm going to act this way. It's always, I don't quote me on this, but I, think there might be a God. Like he's never really like convicted in his beliefs. So that was one of my gripes with him. But my
Mm.
problem is with, I would rather someone tell me what you said. Like you were right about people tearing you a new one for saying either of those things. It's because if they either know or think they know more, they instantly get mad at anyone who doesn't. So, for example, if someone said, "Oh, well, I think they were both just wailing on each other," things like that, and then if that was the case, things I would actually just sit down and tell them, like, "Oh, well, here's the evidence I saw, and here's all these photos that she faked, and Brian Newmeister was not allowed to testify about the metadata he saw from when she would take a picture. She would take the exact same photo and then edit it, but then she accidentally submitted both copies of the photos in many cases. So you have the clean photo, and then you have the one where she edited on and like changed the filter, made her look more bruised and haggard, things like that. I would just walk them through my beliefs on what I've seen. Like this is what I saw. This is her friends. This is what I think they were trying to do and accomplish, and the money that they amount that they wanted to extort. Things like that. I would just talk to them about it. But you have people now who are just like, "Oh, you think differently from me, then your throat needs to be cut." It's like a very jihadist kind of reasoning with the world, and I thought we were all trying to, calm that down, but I guess not.
Mhm. No, exactly. That umbrella guy, and also Mr. Larry Foreman,
Yeah,
are, these guys are a bit out of my range, but I've come across them in looking at the Depp Heard thing, because they do exactly what you say. They talk you through certain things, but these what these people are up against is the believe the victims uh, propaganda of the last sort of since the 2014 that we're talking about, which just it doesn't matter if Amber was largely responsible for everything. We still believe the complainant, which is the correct term for it. And it's like, well, what about the actual facts then? They're like, well, that's not the point. So you just the court of public opinion is very tricky. It's also very money making, and it's very OJ died. OJ Simpson died just don't know when this is going to come out, but very recently. And it's like that was the start of the rolling news back in the 90s. I remember as a 20 something watching that going off, the slow speed car case and all the car crash. And then it's only yesterday that all of those old original culture wars, well, I suppose culture wars have been going on forever, haven't they? We've just got it now instantly, like you mentioned. But that slow speed car chase through Los Angeles, very epochal stuff, and watching it for 24 hours a day. That's the main story for me, the rolling news cycle.
yeah.
Killings.
It's just TMZ. The mention of all these sleazy, like entire industries built on spying on rich people and celebrities, like whole strange carcasses and tumors that have grown off of the freedom of the press. And like I love the freedom of the press. I think it should be preserved wherever it can, but there is always the risk of the yellow journalism creeping up and just the crazy people. Because if you give anyone, a camera, if you give anyone the ability to make citizen journalism, as a lot of people call it, you do run the risk of just the most random, crazy people getting you to believe anything.
Mm,
Like Alex Jones might be an example for a lot of people. Like he says crazy things, like he thinks that frogs are turning gay because of chemicals in the water, things like that. Like he'll say the most wild things, but there are people who actually take him as like the most credible news source in the country, and like that's things like that happen, and but I think it's worth it to have the freedom of the press to be able to investigate anything and print any truth that they think that the public should know about, and any truth that they can verify with evidence to get their hands on. Like I think that every institution should be held accountable if possible, and it's one of the institutions that can do that. But yeah,
mm,
it's a whole crazy thing. But
mm,
another figure I wanted to ask you about, you didn't mention him, was Harvey Weinstein. So in the U.S., I think he was found guilty of, I think rape, I have to double check that to make sure I'm 100% sure, but I think it was rape, a sexual assault. There was bribery involved as well, and there was a lot of like pressure that he was putting on people. What exactly was your perspective on his entire case unraveling? Because I think him personally, we could talk about his case specifically, but I think we both agree on him as the person. But I think what you were talking to me about in the messages was an after effect of what was done in regard to him that may have been more catastrophic than just, oh, we got the bad guy.
Hmm.
Could you elaborate on what you were thinking about Harvey Weinstein in relation to the UK cancel culture?
Well, he obviously he was a big he was a big pebble that made a huge ripple, and that's the Me Too movement, and that's had its benefits. But like Black Lives Matter, it's as we've seen from report after report, it gets manipulated, abused, exaggerated, stretched until the courts are full of this stuff, the prisons are full of it, the police are either full of it or um, enjoying it. Well, not enjoying it, but it's just confusing everything because everything gets stretched out to being um, how is he looking at me? It's like with the sex offence laws, what they actually are get expanded into the most strange directions. We've got an MP here who was just about a year after Harvey, or maybe at the same time, Damien Green, his name was, a Tory, um, was investigated for having touched a secretary's knee in the 1980s. And then at the same time as that, Dwayne Cousins, who's a Metropolitan Police officer, rapes and murders, abducts and murders a young Sarah Everard in a despicable case. I'm happy to use that term for what he did, and now he's doing a full life sentence. And it's these two things are now on the sexual assault spectrum, is what I'm trying to say. And Harvey's there in the middle of all this. Um, a genius producer of wonderful films, gonzo films from not, what I mean, but like
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction and everything else. These things are he's a legendary and a very creative man, and but that gets parked by everyone like Picasso or whatever. It's like that's actually what I know and knew Harvey Weinstein for. He also made The King's Speech, which is the best for film about stammering ever made. I'm a stammerer who's written about stammering, so for many reasons, I feel for him creatively, and to see someone's legacy done away like that. It's really important to separate the man uh, the art from the behaviour, whether it's Picasso or him, Harvey Weinstein, or even the politicians too, even Bill Clinton or whatever. These people that we all know. Um, there's work, and then there's perceptions of what's going on. I think that the fact that the casting couch was burnt by him and the trial is a good thing. I don't think that anybody should, get their films for that sort of thing, and they also shouldn't be pitching for it. And also, he got into, to put it very, very mildly, some very bad habits, and he admitted that getting into a Humvee one day. He said, "I'm going to go away to get some help." I don't think he predicted that he'd get 26 years, 23 years, so I think extras added to the Los Angeles trial. And it's like, you know, um, for a person that's got into bad habits with unlimited power, to me, to the liberal part of me that believes in forgiveness and conflict resolution and things, it seems, come on, lots of careers were made, lots of people testifying against him, their careers were made by him. Catherine Deneuve stood up and said such things. His solicitor, Donna Rotunno, was is still stridently saying that's the case. The investigative reporter who goes by Claire Best in in the New Hampshire, she's a brilliant uh, has tracked all the connections to the Democratic Party to say that he was done because he was so much in debt to the Democrats and he wasn't going to be able to pay it back. That's her take on it. So there's all kinds of different points of view about what happened to him. It's in a different country than me. But that said, we all have a say in the American president because they're the most powerful person in the world. And we all have a say in Hollywood because they've sold themselves to the world. as our entertainment. So whilst it's an American thing, these people are our property to comment on and to, property to comment on because they've offered themselves up as that. So it's just fascinating. And what the Me Too thing turned into was not what it started out as.
I have a firm belief that most countries today, in today's world, will import largely what they export. So if they're exporting violence, as the U.S. government does on a yearly basis worldwide, we have more military bases around the world than the Roman Empire almost. So we are spread, and we commit. Well, not we, but our unelected parts of our government can commit mass atrocities for largely financial and geographical benefits or resource benefits. They want to, for example, we invaded countries and took all their bananas, and basically we started importing those because, and we did it through bloodshed, through force. We stole a ton of oil in the Middle East, things like that. So it happens. And but if you are exporting things like, films, and if you are exporting art, and like you said, if you are around the world and you want people to all come pay to see your things and have it translated for them, of course they do deserve to have the full investigation. They deserve to see everything. They deserve to know the facts, and they deserve to have any opinions that they want on the public figure, or just access to information about the shady dealings and the money and everything, all that stuff,
Mm.
who they hurt, who the victims are, if they want to have their names out, things like that. If they want to be anonymous, that's fine too. But I just find it strange too that there are people like him who got utterly destroyed, nothing left to pick the bones of, but you still have a ton of Epstein's associates walking around completely free, years after his death and arrest. Well, third or fourth arrest, but still arrest. And then you have people who are knowingly, like, you knowingly gave him money and helped him funnel money and helped him commit crimes, like JP Morgan Bank, completely untouched. Like, there are institutions here that are untouchable because they're too rich. Banks, companies, some government agencies. So there's a lot of fear that goes into this. And I think that a huge part of the reason why a lot of cultural issues haven't been fixed here is fear, because most people know better. They know they are kind of centrist. 79% of voters here are independent, but yet they always are choosing between a Democrat or Republican because those two parties have too much power, money, and influence, and they squeeze all the independents out. Um, have Up in the UK, do you think, I've always wanted to ask someone this, the parliamentary system, do you think it's more beneficial, or do you think it's largely kind of just the same, like a veneer of democracy and choosing, and arguing to make it look good, but at the core, it's still the same kind of people running things?
It's very interesting you should ask that because just this afternoon I've sort of set up a petition which asks a government petition that says, can we have a referendum on proportional representation before the election? Because we are also tired of the binary offered by the Conservatives and Labour, which is, as I'm sure your people will know, the Republicans and Democrats traditionally, though they have their own, that's pretty much how it goes. At the moment, it looks like that the Labour Party is going to get in by a majority, quite a sizable majority, simply because everyone's had enough of 14 years of the Tories. And that's not a good enough reason when the appetite in Britain right now is so diversely stretched across probably 6 to 8 different kinds of parties, from the Greens to Reform, who are quite sort of patriotic sort of thing, which they're a new party, and Reclaim Party, which is a party of culture, trying to be, it's an anti-woke thing. All these different ones, and the Liberal Democrats are ages old, 200 years old, and come into power now and again, and but now they're seen as a bunch of sandal-wearing hippies. All of these parties have different interests, but we're only led to believe it's Labour or Conservatives because of the first past the post system. I've Mr. Andrew Doyle, who's a hero of mine of the Free Speech Nation, is a very big supporter of proportional representation. I'm not as party political as most people. I don't actually I find it hard to care. I push myself sometimes, especially in an election year. It becomes more interesting. But until we get proportional representation, it's meaningless because it is the uniparty. They're both going to do what each other do, whether that's Israel or the non-dom taxes and it's just too tedious to get into. But it's as annoying as your stuff, you know. And when you're a guy of culture and the arts, they're always they always talk very nicely about the arts and do nothing for them. And then again, do I want states sponsored art sort of kind of giving me diversity quotas all over the place? I'm strongly against DEI these days from what we've seen over the last couple of years. Not because I'm against equality, equality is fab. DEI is an absolute race to the bottom. And right now, the parties are attempting to work out what to do about that and how much they're able to do anything about it. So, and it's so hard with DEI because everyone says, "You're so cruel." I'm like, no, no, DEI is cruel. You don't understand. And you're having to invert that whole argument as well, you know.
Yeah, I would be horrified if I went to an island and they saw me as different, so therefore they put me in charge of one of the most important jobs there, which is to get the coconuts out of the tree. But I
Right.
can't get them out. I can't climb the tree. I don't know how to get them down. I don't know how to crack them open and extract the milk. I waste them all, you know. But they're not angry. They're not upset because they know that I am, just this poor, underrepresented, minority. Like they just, if people see other humans like that as lesser than because they look different and then try to thrust them into positions that they haven't fully trained for just because of what they look like. That's so much more racist than someone saying, I want the most highly qualified pilot to fly me across the country in this floating jet, like built on parts that were, by a company that probably cut corners and wanted to save some money. And now we're flying around in a Boeing and we're going to crash, like we're going to catch on fire. The new Boeings are a mess because the company wants to cut corners and save money building them. And they have enough money to pay off the inspectors and make sure they don't get in any trouble for it. But in the end of the day, it's just it seems like more of a mess than I would like to try and deal with because it's a big reason too why people go for escapes. They go to film, they go to literature. They don't want to hear it. They're tired of hearing it, and then that's the biggest problem I've encountered is that when people do try to change things and they want to make things better, largely they get mostly unsupported because the vast majority of people who want things to be better don't know what to do or are too scared or don't want to get up and do it as a group to like, for example, 79% of independents here. We could all just write in an excellent candidate. We could all vote on somebody that 90% of us agree is a great person or qualified leader. We don't though. That's the problem. And we're all boxed into this fear of if I go outside the lines, fill in the different bubble, it's a vote for this, and things like that. So, what do you think is the biggest counter to people who are too afraid to like get up and just try and do something? And like, not to bring up a controversial figure, but I was very interested in the UKIP run of Carl Benjamin that you guys had a few years ago because he was enormous online. Millions and millions of people listen to him every day. And then he went out into the streets of the country. He would talk. He would have milkshakes thrown at him. But like at the end of the day, he didn't get a lot of votes. Do you think that he was sabotaged, or do you think that he was just artificially popular because of internet attention that could have come from anywhere in the world?
Mm. Are you talking about Carl Benjamin or Mr. Nigel Farage?
Yeah, he ran as a UKIP. I
Mm.
forget which position he was running for. Was he actually running for prime minister, or was he running for a lesser cabinet position?
Um, I think he'd have been running for just to be a member of parliament,
Okay, yeah.
because that was UKIP before Brexit. So yeah, probably about that. Kakar was at its biggest slightly before I started to pay attention. I came on to all this in about 17, 18. Um, so, but yes, he is an honest broker who talks about history a lot in terms of how things sort of should be, and he's very much a Carl Matt Walsh of UK, I would say. He's got the beard and Orson
The-
Welles sort of stature, to him,
yeah.
and he's an alpha male, and he's a very convincing figure. He got into trouble with Jess for Phillips, who's a Labour MP here, and because he made some sort of a joke about rape where she was mentioned, and the details of it are almost as sketchy as that. And I've seen footage where it's like, but these things will get exploded and blown up, and that's what happened to him. And it appears to be, but he started up the Lotus Eaters. He's still a really important figure on the counterculture, and just is still, yeah, he's a very important voice in the alt right, but also, as I say, he was bigger before I paid attention. So there's that kind of a difference in my understanding of him.
Yeah, I think right about the time he got demonetized on YouTube, he moved off of it a bit. He's come back in a small way, but he was around 1 million subscribers. Now he's at probably 800 something thousand. But yeah, it
Right.
was that was right around 2018, 2019. They demonetized him, so he said, "Screw it, I'm going to move somewhere else." And I want to make money off this content because enough people are watching to justify that. But
Mhm.
my thing with him was that it was very strange because he tended to be someone who was pro free speech and pro joke. So the joke that I read, and he did a debate in the states about this. It was, I forget what it was, 2017 MythCon or something like that. It was some sort of convention um, where a lot of internet influencers would appear and talk about their life and their content they make. Very interesting stuff, I know. But he was there and he debated someone about it, and his point was that um, she was saying something about being scared of people wanting to harass her, things like that. So his tweet in response to her, because she wanted to make some sort of new law about harassment, he said something like, "I wouldn't even rape you, like I would not," as a joke. And like it was a very strange thing because a lot of people took it to mean he would. As like, no, he wasn't being sarcastic, he actually wouldn't. So I think the point he was trying to make was he could threaten to not do bad things to people or to do nice things to people, but he would still get in trouble with internet what is it, censorship laws. So that's the point he was trying to make. And like the other guy with the dog and the Nazi salute joke, like things like that. Like I think they were
Count
just,
Dankula. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were just highly rebellious and protective of their sphere where they started, which was the internet. Kind of like the people with the video games, Gamergate. They were very protective of people trying to regulate and mandate things for what they see in their games. Like they said, no, 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 full creative freedom. Let them do what they want. So my fascination with him was mostly, how do you get destroyed for telling someone you would never do a horrible thing like that to them? I guess it's because the word is included. Because you said the word, you're in trouble. And it's like, that's bizarre to me because they say the word all the time when they say similar things like, "I'm against rape," or people are like, "The rape culture, this is bad." Like they say it, but they don't get in trouble. But then he says he wouldn't, and he does get in trouble. It's like, it seems like a catch 22.
Yeah. It doesn't apply the other way around, of course. The the women, or not women, feminists, media justice feminists, I've come around to calling them now because there's a very specific group, and this happened to Mr. Lawrence Fox. Do you know him?
I heard a little bit about him. Yeah, what exactly happened for anyone who didn't?
Yeah, about 2 months ago, I think it was, Lawrence, who's the leader of the Reclaim party, which I mentioned earlier, um, was on GB News on Dan Wootton's show, and was very sort of relaxedly, as he does. He's a very relaxed type person. He doesn't have airs and graces. He's quite posh. He's an actor here of an acting family, but he doesn't do airs and graces. So he was just chatting with Dan Wootton, who's a big deal, who's also cancelled because of this event. Um, Lawrence said, "I wouldn't even shag her about a." You know what shag means over there, right? So
Oh
sorry.
yeah, yeah, you're good.
Okay, sorry.
No,
Um,
no, you're
uh,
fine.
yeah, about a journalist, Ava Santina for Politics Joe, um, in relation to something else. But Ava Santina had been using this sort of term in context of men out there as well. Thing is, they brought it to Lawrence because he's always pushing the establishment, and the establishment this time was able to get him via news because we're talking about, which is to make fun of media justice feminism, and that's what he did. And he was cancelled. He was kicked off GB News. He was suspended for a while and then kicked off, as was his pal Calvin Robinson. They've started their new show now, as was Dan Wootton, who's a massive draw. He's probably the biggest draw of those three. He's gone to start, but all these three have gone off to start off their own things. GB News, which I'm not in any way against, I love loads of their shows, and I'm I'm not paid by any of these people, so I can talk about them, But it's like interesting watching the alt that we have sort of crumble a little bit. And then these guys I'm talking about, they get on X and start to slag everything off, say they're all bastards. I'm like, shush, shush. This is just business. They're just trying to, But I come at this with this business eye. People get angry about it because they react emotionally. I'm like, this it's just the media. The media doesn't care about your emotional reactions. Well, it depends on them. So I can't actually remember why he said he wouldn't shag Santina right now. That's the kind of situation we're in. But yeah, he did.
So it's gotten worse. In 2017, you couldn't say I would not assault anyone. Now you can't say I would not consensually engage in relations with this person. Like it's
Well,
gotten to the
indeed.
point where you can't even say I wouldn't shake your hand because now it's going to be like, oh, that's that's anti-government. Like what? Oh yeah, the standards change, the words change, and it always seems to be devolving rather than evolving. Like I haven't really seen any positive benefits coming out of this culture. It largely just seems to be a forest fire that doesn't have anything that it's laying down after burning away the trees. It just seems like destruction for the sake of destruction. Because I've seen these people that will attack all the people we're talking about relentlessly. I've seen them gather and they have these little conventions sometimes. They'll film themselves and they don't even start. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there was a video a few years ago of a college campus had a bunch of communist students to get together, and a lot of LGBTQ students get together, a lot of people, right? And they couldn't even get the meeting started because they were all arguing about like, please don't clap, that's triggering. Please don't like, wait, you used my pronouns wrong. Wait, she's in a mask, but he's not. Wait, why'd you say he? Like, are you assuming my gender? Like, they literally could not even get it begun because they were so, you know, neurotic and obsessed
Yeah.
with each other's identities and their own identities that they didn't even see each other as human. They just saw each other as little Wally robots with, the wrong configuration and the wrong name tag being read. So it's just I don't know what kind of world they want because they want a world where only other people are ever held accountable for anything, but also, if anything bad, if they do anything horrible, they shouldn't be, canceled the same way. It's very odd. Most of these people who attack J.K. Rowling, for example, are horribly misogynistic, but they
Mm.
can't recognize that because they think they're fighting, a turf, and it's like a religious kind of zealot to their war. And also as someone who's more atheistic, agnostic, I just because I have no evidence for anything supernatural at all, and no one's presented me with any reasonable good evidence to have faith in something that's not physically here that we can observe and measure. There's a lot of secular religions that I'm seeing popping up too, where it's the same kind of cult, but they find themselves superior to the other ones, but they still have cultish attitudes. And like that's been going on since humans evolved.
Mhm. Well, that's the problem with the identity politics in general, is that what we've seen over the last sort of 20 years is quite handy to see it in terms of 2000, like some 21st century project, I find, to give people actual boxes that help, is that identity politics is shit. And it's just, it's a race to the bottom. It's a way to limit yourself. It's a way to box other people for your own limited understanding. And that's not the way to live. You're supposed to expand your understanding, to understand where people are coming from. Um, you know, all of the best qualities of Christianity, or all the Abrahamic religions, but being Christian, I'll say Christianity, is the ability to look at the reasons behind someone did what they did, and they're a human being like you are, and to thus give them love and forgiveness. That's a very simplistic way of putting Christianity, absolutely lost on the woke or the identity politicians who are just politics, power, power, power. And there is more to life than power. They all say, I love Michel Foucault for his stuff on justice reform, but for his stuff on power, no, there's more to it. There's more to life, Nietzsche. There is a spiritual realm, and there's a loving realm. There's a natural realm where none of these things are about power. Out in nature, these animals aren't killing each other based on a principle of power. They're killing each other based on a principle of sustenance, and it sustains an entire thing. But our invented boxes of our own politics are reductive, and we're going to see that. And the problem is, when you talk objectively like this, you sound like an old fart. But nothing like that. Objectivity shouldn't be seen as fuddy-duddy, and that's it's temporary though. It's temporary. It's going to come back to rationality.
What do you think the journey to that would be? I mean, the number one problem I think is education. It's abysmal in most of the Western countries because they're trying to make things more focused on individual people's um, most recent trauma in a lot of cases. So they're telling kids like everything they can about Confederate racism, but they're not saying anything about how we got here. Why do we have a country? Like the Revolutionary War and things like that, all these things are being kind of pushed off a little bit, and it's more about finding lines between your assumption about the world and making it fit that. A lot of my classes I've taken in college have been like, applying cultural Marxism to different art forms and seeing how people are treated differently, applying the feminist theory to different films and books and things, and seeing how women are treated and everything. And it's like, if you're unhealthily constantly looking to fit things into your preconceived notions about how the world should be, often you're sacrificing the truth and you're sacrificing the evidence that you could build to find the best modern or newest form of government. Like, you hate capitalism, okay, fix it. Because we've tried just completely control by the state, monarchy in not modern old monarchies and feudalism and socialism and communism, and it hasn't really worked. We have tried. People are saying we haven't tried. We have tried a lot of these things that these kids are saying we should do. So like,
Mhm.
I'm not even that old, but I do sound like that a lot too, because people think it's somehow old fashioned, or the way of the past to want things to work well and to want people to maximize prosperity, liberty, and happiness for the most people you possibly can. Like, they're just, you know, it's hard to do that in a world where you're either, uneducated, or you're motivated by money, or because power doesn't corrupt. Power, as Frank Herbert said, attracts the corrupt. So you will always have people trying to obtain and then abuse systems of power, rather than systems of power causing people to suddenly become evil. It doesn't change your nature quite that much, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think the pathway is to convincing people that they don't have to be pitchfork burned at the stake, witch trials every time they don't like something, besides just saying like, oh, we need to reform education? Because I would agree with that. We're bottom 40, we're 43rd in the world right now, the United States, in their education standards. It's pretty bad. But what do
Wow.
you think is the key to telling these kids right now who are stopping streets because of what they perceive as a genocide, or trying to literally attack an author? What would you try to say to them to kind of like s- get them to understand reason?
Um, I've got a sense that these things are generational in as much as the Gen Z now, the really young, or the 15-year-olds and things, from all accounts, by all anecdotal evidence I'm hearing, are disinterested in woke to the point of rebellion, um, and are starting to they're kicking back against the slightly older generation who are and what the older Gen Zs and the younger millennials, this kind of thing, these very very identity politics washed people. The Gen Z is saying no, and they're being very gnarly and very interesting. So there's a good chance it'll. What the progressives don't realize is that their establishment, or they do realize it, they can't accept it. They, with the Democrats and what about to be the Labour and lots of people in the Tories as well, all over all of Europe, is that woke is the establishment. And they keep pretending that they're some sort of revolutionaries. That's the most irritating thing about it. And that's their bullshit rhetoric online, is that like, you guys in control, you right wingers, and like, no, you guys are in control. You're in cultural control, and you don't need the control of the laws anymore. um, what I'm trying to say is that I think the generations are going to sort it out themselves. Also, things like the Harvard controversy of a couple of months ago with the Claudine Gay, um, being upended for being a plagiarist, and also the two things that have happened just here with the trans stuff. That's going to ripple around the world, and you might get to see a massive hit on the American trade with a bit of luck for sanity. And those things will then start to work out if we can get the rationality and the science to go, stop, enough. You can't disestablish every culturally agreed term that we've got because we haven't subscribed to that. And you're going to make all the centrists far right. And you don't want that because you just redefine what things are by doing that. It's so counterproductive. I think they're going to work it out, and it's going to have worked itself out because people are getting more and more irritated. But they're not dying in the streets from these arguments, these discussions we're having. They're just massively irritated, and that's enough to make them sort of go enough at some point.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is that the far right is very easy to identify because there is such a spotlight and a microscope on them, and they are scrutinized for any possibility of any kind of like violent uprising, and they are often accused of things that they didn't even do in some cases. So there are a lot of there's a lot of scrutiny there. But the problem is the people who have a lot of institutional and governmental control here, the far left, they are very good at disguising their own intentions and beliefs and even their fellows. So, for example, you have a solid idea, and you are one of, I would say, even billions of people around the world, probably a couple billion, who could recognize what you mean when you say what you just said. Um, but then there are just an equal number, if not more, people who would just say, "Oh, well, that word doesn't mean anything. What does woke even mean? I'm not woke. What does that even? You're just using that to say you don't like, this diversity or whatever." What would you say as like your best definition of that word and why it works to use to describe what they're doing right now?
What woke?
Yeah, because the number one response I hear when I say when I if I, anyone says anything that criticizes, a lot of these modern movements, they'll sum it up as woke. But then the response to that is, oh well, that word doesn't even mean anything. Define it. What does it even mean? We're
Mm,
not. What do you talk about? Things like that. It's like
yeah,
casting aspersions rather than owning up to what they believe, or supporting it.
yeah. They're not actually doing the subject. They're going around it. It's a straw man, isn't it? Um, Obviously, originally it's from the lead belly of being aware of the problems in the American sort of civil rights movement 80, 100 years ago. Fantastic rootsy beginnings. The problem with it is the bad grammar, because I think English bad grammarians got hold of that and said we can't be using that as a verb or an adjective, and I think that's where its main problem comes from. It's already irritating because it's like we're being encouraged to use a pidgin English sort of thing. Um, but it's just so small, so handy, so meaningless to white heterodoxy, which is as valid a identity box as any other, um, because it's such an other to that, and it's very self important, self righteous. This is how all of the intersectionalities work, are woke, and so that's the alt right, which is reactionary, um, defining the moves that have been made against it. So it's not doing anything wrong in a democracy. It's just saying we're calling out what you're doing, which is, as you said, good ways of hiding what you're actually doing, which is a very old school leftist trick. If there's one thing that I've learned from observing the right and often being a bit more simpatico with that these days, is how much more direct it all is. It really does say, yes, we believe in power. Yes, and I'm talking about in the sense of sort of the traditional power rather than the woke kind of power. Um, I don't like the term woke any more than anybody else. It's become a media term. It's very handy. It fits in your pocket well. I prefer the progressives versus the rationalists. Much more handy than left and right, and much more descriptive, in my opinion. I'm very proud of being a rationalist, though I'm shit at science. But I'm also progressive. I've always considered myself progressive. They've just taken that ball and run so far off to the left. They're on the other side of Chairman Mao, and that's where I'm not. And so um, I'm happy with rationalist.
Yeah, it's a group of people that genuinely thinks that the best and most moral solution to bad things happening or inequality is just full communism. And the problem is it's just been done to death. Like it's not more fair, it's worse. Because when you give the government exclusive control over absolutely everything, things just get worse. Because the amount of control you see they have now, um, things are pretty shit. But blaming the free market system for that is just always been bizarre to me. It's usually a staple of the uneducated or the undereducated, where they were there, but they didn't learn about like the important things. They learned about like, oh, gender theory and like queer theory and seeing Marxism and everything. And you should watch your films and take a note of how many words the women say, things like that. They didn't learn like the important stuff like economics and math and history and literature. They just quite literally spent a very very highly focused amount of time just being told all of their presuppositions are true. It's all true.
Mm.
It's all about you, the ultimate narcissist experience where you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of someone else's money to go and be sit in a room and told that you're perfect, you're okay. There's kitty litter in the back for everyone who identifies as a cat. It's like, I just it's not a recipe for success, and it leads to a lot of kids coming out saying the most bizarre things and having the strangest, assumptions. Because I've had people older than me, late 20s, early 30s, telling me there's no such thing as far left, no such thing at all. And that's just completely mad to me. Like, how can you actually live in reality and not see the reality? Because, like, I can understand, like everyone else, there's a far left and a far right, and then there's, fringe groups. But, like, to say there isn't one at all is just complete abject rejection of reality. So, like, I think one of the biggest problems with the generation we're stuck in right now is that they're not just unaware of reality and, oh, if we make them aware, things will get better. It's literally a good chunk of them are willing to deny objective reality to accomplish what they want and to get what they want. And that's the biggest problem for me is that I agree with your progressive label because I like when things change for good, but if things change for the sake of change, you're just wasting our time changing things. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of mentality.
Exactly, and that's what's new. That's why this has never been done before. Everyone says nothing new under the sun, and yeah, things go around. But this tech we have, brand new, and that thought that you can't, we there's a good chance we've reached the end of progress. There's nothing wrong about that, and that's in terms of the rights and things like this. When you start to do the changes that we're trying to put in to try to unpack race and to unravel the things that you are, to get Brits and Americans to um, disavow their history that their grandfathers went through and made. But my ancestors were as um, disadvantaged by power structures as lots of people from other races. And slavery started in the Islamic world anyway, and there's more slaves alive in the world today than there have been ever in history. All these facts are true, all completely ignored just in the sense of history, which history is very important to me and to Britain in culturally in general. And so I've got to.
Yeah.
We can probably talk about it next time. But the artistic revisionism is absolutely another thing to drive me mad. So, but I'm suspecting not for today.
I mean, the epistemology too, the word slave, everyone knows where that derived from and who it describes the Slavs, right? So it's like
Mhm.
the word was literally made for northern white slaves that were brought down into the desert. So it's like we have epistemological roots for a lot of these things as well, where it's like this is not something that just affects one specific group of people in one specific time period. It's like it's been worldwide and it's been in practice since as long as we've been able to get away with it. That's the kind of people that we're talking about here. Like they will traffic people if they can get away with it. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, that's just I like your thoughts on it. I like a lot of what you've had to say. You seem really rooted in a fairly logical and as rational as possible response to a world, especially a world that's gone increasingly mad. But I'm also
Mm.
told that's a generational phenomenon too. Everyone thinks that, oh, this is crazy. It can't get worse than this. And then next generation says, hold my beer. But I think the
Well,
final thing that I want to kick off on before we plug all your projects and everything and talk about what you're going to do next is I love one in very particular what you said about technology and um, is it okay to throw up your hands and say we're all right now? Like is the line to draw between, do we need more of these every single year, or can we have, like, can we start working on getting homeless people off the streets? Like, how much do we need AI? Like, how much do we want to risk that power? But that's why I'm really kind of hinging on that, and that there is a lot of room for future discussions, because I like what you're saying, and I
Mm.
like where you're coming from. But in the future here, coming up, what are you doing next? What are some projects you're working on, or are you going to be doing any other interviews, touring, or anything? Talk about these books, or any of your findings about all these.
Well, I sort of attempt to do things on a year-to-year basis these days, and yeah, as I sort of said at the start of the show, A Delicate Balance of Reason coming out next month. The date is being set at the moment, so I think it's the 20th of May, which is the day after my 49th birthday. So I think that's probably a pretty accurate time to do that.
Oh,
That's a book about,
congratulations.
thank you for getting there. So that's about the culture wars, like we're accidentally talking about today. And Compelling Speech, my book from last year, which is about stammering, the stammering enigma. I haven't done much to you because we're on a roll today, but it does happen. And I'm a lifelong expert in that. And that's just been published by Audible, which has been great. And it's rather exciting to be on their platform because audiobooks are a big deal at the moment. So
Hmm.
if your listeners fancy listening to that um, piece of work. It's like an autobiography of a stammer, I describe it as. It's out there on Audible and Amazon. Compelling Speech, The Stammering Enigma. And Caucasian Nights, which is an album I released earlier in the year. It's like a spoken word set to hip hop beats album. Um, Started off the year being distributed, then got taken down because the distribution company went wrong. And I've got another distribution company, so I'm going to be releasing that again next year and next month as well. So these three big cultural bits is what I'm doing at the moment.
The names of your three projects again, they are
Yes, A Delicate Balance of Reason, which is a
mhm.
book I've got coming out next month in May. Um, Compelling Speech, The Stammering Enigma is an audiobook which has been out for a couple of months and as a book for a year. That's the last one. And Caucasian Nights is an album, spoken word and alternative type album, part new music, part poetry, which I released a couple of months ago. Is about to get a re-release as well. So those three are the biggies right now. Other things planned for the future too, but I won't tell them right now because it's too far away, and that's three enough, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's great too that you're able to do as much as you are doing. But yeah, everyone check those out. I have listened to about half of your audiobook so far, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been very eye opening, ear opening, as one would say. But it's been actually very good to listen to, and
Oh,
it kind
thank
of
you.
helped me get some ideas about where the discussion might go. And it was great to be able to sit down and talk to you. I appreciate your time and everything, including all technical know-hows and all that. I appreciate the willingness to have actual discussions about these things, and as always, I try to open things up, make it more discussion based, and I save my debates for when they're super important. So, like, I appreciate your willingness to come and just have a conversation, try to figure things out, rather than, like you said, pull the gotcha on them, or have a contentious argument, or see people as different just because you may have a differing opinion or different information. But no, it was a very fruitful discussion. I had a great time. And if we ever have any other things to talk about in the future, I would love to try and link up and work those out and talk about them. So I appreciate you coming on. It was great to talk to you.
That sounds great, Johnny. I've had a great time myself, so love to come back and do it again. Why not?
Absolutely, man. As soon as I pay for premium. So, yeah.